Chapter 7 The Psychology of Dream Processes. De-waking caused by dreams. The function of dreams. The anxiety dream. For consciousness, which for us means a sense organ for the apprehension of psychic qualities, can be excited in waking life from two sources. Firstly, from the periphery of the whole apparatus, the perceptive system, and secondly, from the excitation of pleasure and pain, which emerge as the soul psychic qualities yielded by transposition of energy in the喂，你好。
你好，你好，我是工商银行客户经理，我姓施，拨号59289号，请问您是刘峰先生吗？
是我。
您好，刘先生，给您致电呢，是因为目前我们工商银行为响应国家交通部要求，需要给您免费邮寄高速 ETC 通行设备。您之前留的新城旗街这个地址还能收到吗？
收不到了，我不在那儿住了，而且我也不需要这个设备。
您之前是已经安装好了吗？
不是，我没有车。对。
目前没车是不
啊。
好意思，那打扰您了
好，再见哈。
好，再见。
For causing, which for us means a sense organ for the apprehension of psychic qualities, can be excited in waking life from two sources. Firstly, from periphery of the whole apparatus, the perceptive system, and secondly, from the excitation of pleasure and pain, which emerge as the solely psychic qualities yielded by the transposition of energy in the interior of apparatus. All other processes in the passive system, even those in the preconscious, are devoid of all psychic qualities and are therefore not objects of consciousness, inasmuch as they do not provide either pleasure or pain for its perception. We shall have to assume that this release of pleasure and pain automatically regulate the course of the cathartic processes, but in order to make possible more delicate performances, it subsequently proved necessary to render the flow of ideas more independent of pain signals. To accomplish this, the PCS system needed qualities of its own which could attract consciousness, and most probably receive them through the connection of the preconscious processes with the memory system of speech symbols, which was not divided of quality. Through the qualities of this system, consciousness, hitherto only a sense organ for perception, now becomes also a sense organ for a part of our thought processes. There are now, as it were, two sensory surfaces, one turned toward perception and the other toward the preconscious thought processes. De-waking caused by dreams. The function of dreams. The anxiety dream. For consciousness, which for us means a sense organ for the apprehension of psychic qualities, can be excited in waking life from two sources. Firstly, from the periphery of the whole apparatus, the perceptive system, and secondly, from the excitation of pleasure and pain, which emerge as the soul psychic qualities yielded by transposition of energy in the interior of apparatus. All other processes in the passive systems, even those in the preconscious, are devoid of all psychic qualities, and are therefore not objects of consciousness, inasmuch as they do not provide either pleasure or pain for its perception. We shall have to assume that this release of pleasure and pain automatically regulate the course of the archaic processes, but in order to make possible more delicate performances, it subsequently proved necessary to render the flow of ideas more independent of paying single. To accomplish this, the PCS system needed qualities of its own which could attract consciousness, and most probably received them through the connection of the preconscious processes with the memory system of speech symbols, which was not devoid of quality. Through the qualities of the system, consciousness, hitherto only a sense organ for perception, now becomes also a sense organ of a part of our thought processes. There are now, as it were, two sensory surfaces, one turned toward perception and the other toward the perception's thought processes. I must assume that the sensory surface of consciousness, which is turned to the preconscious of is rendered far more unexcitable by sleep than the surface turned toward the P system. The giving up of interest in the nocturnal thought process is, of course, an appropriate procedure. Nothing is happened to in thought. The preconscious wants to sleep, but once the dream becomes perception, it is capable of exciting consciousness through the qualities now gained. The sensory excitation performs what is in fact its function, namely, it directs as part of the Cathy X energy available in the PCS to the exciting course in the form of attention. We must therefore admit that the dream always have a waking effect, that is, it calls into activity part of the quiescence energy of the PCS. Under the influence of the energy, it now undergoes the process which we have described as secondary elaboration, with a view to coherence and comprehensibility. This means that the dream is treated by this energy like any other perception content. It is subjected to the same anticipatory ideas as far at least as the material allows. As far as the third part of the dream process has any direction, this is once more progressive. I must assume that the sensory surface of consciousness, which is turned to the preconscious, is rendered far more excitable by sleep than the surface turned toward the P system. The giving up of interest in the nocturnal thought process is, of course, an appropriate procedure. Nothing is to happen in thought. The preconscious wants to sleep, but once the dream becomes perception, it is capable of exciting consciousness through the qualities now gained. The sensory excitation performs what is in fact its function, namely, it directs a part of the Cathy X energy available in the PCS to the exciting course in the form of attention. We must therefore admit that the dream always has a waking effect, that is, it calls into activity part of the quiescence energy of the PCS. Under the influence of this energy, it now undergoes the process which we have described as secondary elaboration, with a view to coherence and comprehensibility. This means that the dream is treated by this energy like any other perception content. It is subjected to the same anticipatory ideas as far as at least as the material allows, as far as this third party of the dream process has any direction. This is one more progress. Throughout the dream work, the dream process now either gains sufficient intensity to attract unconsciousness to itself and arouse the preconscious quite independently of the time of profundity of sleep, or its intensity is insufficient and it must wait in readiness until attention, becoming more alert immediately before waking, meets it halfway. More dreams seem to operate with relative psychic intensities, for they wait for the process of waking. This then explains the fact that as a rule, we perceive something dreamed if we are suddenly roused from a deep sleep. Here, as well as in spontaneous waking, our first glance light up the perception content created by the dream work, while the next falls on the provided by the outer world. Throughout the dream work, the dream process now either gains sufficient intensity to attract consciousness to itself and to arouse the preconscious quite independently of the time of profundity of sleep, or its intensity is insufficient and it must wait in readiness until attention, becoming more alert immediately before waking, meets it halfway. Most dreams seem to operate with relatively slight psychic intensities, for they wait for the process of waking. This then explains the fact that as a rule, we perceive something dreamed if we are suddenly roused from the deep sleep. Here, as in spontaneously waking, our first glance lights upon the perception connect created by the dream work, while the next four on the provided by the outer world. It is quite true that the unconscious wishes are always active. They represent paths which are always practicable. Whenever a quantum of excitation makes use of them, it is indeed an outstanding peculiarity of the unconscious processes that they are indestructible. Nothing can be brought to an end in the unconscious. Nothing is past or forgotten. This is pressed upon us emphatically in the study of the neuroses and is practically of high steer. The unconscious path of thought which leads to the discharge through an attack is forthwith possible again when there is a sufficient accumulation of excitation. The mortification suffered 30 years ago operates after having gained access to the unconscious source of affect. During all these 30 years, as though it were a recent experience, whenever its memory is touched, it revives and slows itself to be cathartic with excitation, which procedures a mortal discharge for itself is an attack. It is precisely here that psychotherapy must intervene. Its task being to ensure that the unconscious processes are settled and forgotten. Indeed, a fading of memories and the weak effect of impressions which are no longer recent, which we are apt to take as self-evident and to explain as a primary effect of time on our psychic memory residues, are in reality secondary changes brought about by laborious work. It is the preconscious that accomplishes this work, and the only course which psychotherapy can pursue is to bring the UCS under the domination of the PCS. There are therefore two possible issues from any single unconscious excitation processes. Either it is left to itself, in which case it ultimately breaks through somewhere and secures. On this one occasion, this a discharge for its excitation into mortality, or it succumbs to the influence of the preconscious, and through this, its excitation becomes bound instead of being discharged. It is the latter case that occurs in the dream processes. The cathy acts from the PCS, which goes to meet the dream once this has attained to perception because it has been drawn either by the excitation of consciousness, binds the unconscious excitation of the dream and renders it harmless as a disturbed of sleep. It was indeed to be expected that the dream, even if originate it was not purposefully processed, would have seized upon some definite function in the play of forces of the psychic life. We now see that what this function is. The dream has taken over the task of bringing the excitation of the UCS, which had been left free, back under the domination of the preconscious. It thus discharges the excitation of the UCS, acts as a safety valve for the later, and at the same time by a single outlay of waking activity secures the sleep of the preconscious. Thus, like the other psychic formations of its group, the dream offers itself as a compromise, serving both systems simultaneously by fulfilling the wishes of both insofar as they are more mutually compatible. There are, therefore, two possible issues for any single unconscious excitation processes. Either it is left to itself, in which case it ultimately breaks through somewhere and secure. On this one occasion, a discharge for its excitation into mortality, or it succumb to the influence of the preconscious, and through this its excitation becomes bound instead of being discharged. It is the latter case that occurs in the dream processes. The cath axis from the PCS which goes to meet the dream once this has attained to perception, because it has been drawn thither by the excitation of consciousness, binds the unconscious excitation of the dream and renders it harmless as a disturbed of sleep. It was indeed to be expected that the dreaming, even if originally it was not a purposefully processes, would have seized upon some definite function in the play of forces of the psychic life. We now see what this function is. The dream has taken over the task of bringing the excitation of the UCS, which had been left free, back under the domination of the preconscious. It thus discharges the excitation of the UCS, acts as a safety valve for the latter, and at the same time, by a slight outlay of waking activity, secures the sleep of the preconscious. Thus, like the other psychic formations of its group, the dream offers itself as a compromise, serving both systems simultaneously by fulfilling the wishes of both insofar as they are mutually compatible.
The psychology of the dream
processes.
D. Waking caused by dreams. The function of dreams, the anxiety dream. For consciousness, which for us means a sense organ for the apprehension of psychic qualities, can be excited in waking life from two sources. Firstly, from the periphery of the whole apparatus, the perceptive system,
system,
and secondly from the excitations of pleasure and pain which emerge as the sole psychic qualities yielded by the transpositions of energy in the interior of the apparatus. All other processes in the psi systems, even those in the preconscious, are devoid of all psychic quality, and are therefore not objects of consciousness, inasmuch as they do not provide either pleasure or pain for its perception. We shall have to assume that these releases of pleasure and pain automatically regulate the course of the cathectic processes. But in order to make possible more delicate performances, it subsequently proved necessary to render the flow of ideas more independent of pain signals. To accomplish this, the PCS system needed qualities of its own which could attract consciousness, and most probably received them through the connection of the preconscious processes with the memory system of speech symbols, which was not devoid of quality. Through the qualities of this system, consciousness, hitherto only a sense organ for perceptions, now becomes also a sense organ for a part of our thought processes. They are now, as it were, two sensory surfaces, one turned toward perception and the other toward the preconscious thought processes. I must assume that the sensory surface of consciousness which is turned to the preconscious is rendered far more unexcitable by sleep than the surface turned toward the P system. The giving up of interest in the nocturnal thought process is, of course, an appropriate procedure. Nothing is to happen in thought. The preconscious wants to sleep. But once the dream becomes perception, it is capable of exciting consciousness through the qualities now gained. The sensory excitation performs what is in fact its function. Namely, it directs a part of the cathectic energy available in the PCS to the exciting cause in the form of attention. We must therefore admit that the dream always has a waking effect. That is, it calls into activity part of the quiescent energy of the PCS. Under the influence of this energy, it now undergoes the process which we have described as secondary elaboration with a view to coherence and comprehensibility. This means that the dream is treated by this energy like any other perception content. It is subjected to the same anticipatory ideas as far at least as the material allows. As far as this third part of the dream process has any direction, this is once more progressive. Through the dream work, the dream process now either gains sufficient intensity to attract consciousness to itself and to arouse the preconscious, quite independently of the time or profundity of sleep, or its intensity is insufficient, and it must wait in readiness until attention, becoming more alert immediately before waking, meets it halfway. Most dreams seem to operate with relatively slight psychic intensities, for they wait for the process of waking. This then explains the fact that as a rule we perceive something dreamed if we are suddenly roused from a deep sleep. Here, as well as in spontaneous waking, our first glance lights upon the perception content created by the dream work, while the next falls on that provided by the outer world. It is quite true that the unconscious wishes are always active. They represent paths which are always practical, whenever a quantum of excitation makes use of them. It is indeed an outstanding peculiarity of the unconscious processes that they are indestructible. Nothing can be brought to an end in the unconscious. Nothing is past or forgotten. This is impressed upon us emphatically in the study of the neuroses.
In the study of the neuroses, and especially of hysteria.
The unconscious path of thought which leads to the discharge through an attack is forthwith passable again when there is a sufficient accumulation of excitation. The mortification suffered 30 years ago operates after having gained access to the unconscious sources of affect during all these 30 years as though it were a recent experience. Whenever its memory is touched, it revives and shows itself to be cathected with excitation, which procures a motor discharge for itself in
an attack. It is precisely
an attack.
here
It is precisely here that psychotherapy must intervene, its task being to ensure that the unconscious processes are settled and forgotten. Indeed, the fading of memories and the weak affect of impressions which are no longer recent, which we are apt to take as self-evident and to explain as a primary effect of time on our psychic memory residues, are in reality secondary changes brought about by laborious work. It is the preconscious that accomplishes this work, and the only course which psychotherapy can pursue is to bring the UCS under the domination of the PCS. There are therefore two possible issues for any single unconscious excitation process. Either it is left to itself, in which case it ultimately breaks through somewhere and secures on this one occasion a discharge for its excitation into motility, or it succumbs to the influence of the preconscious, and through this its excitation becomes bound instead of being discharged. The latter case that occurs in the dream process. The cathexis from the PCS which goes to meet the dream once this is attained to perception, because it has been drawn thither by the excitation of consciousness, binds the unconscious excitation of the dream and renders it harmless as a disturber of sleep. It was indeed to be expected that the dream, even if originally it was not a purposeful process, would have seized upon some definite function in the play of forces of the psychic life. We now see what this function is. The dream has taken over the task of bringing the excitation of the UCS, which had been left free, back under the domination of the preconscious. It thus discharges the excitation of the UCS, acts as a safety valve for the latter, and at the same time, by a slight outlay of waking activity, secures the sleep of the preconscious. Thus, like the other psychic formations of its group, the dream offers itself as a compromise, serving both systems simultaneously by fulfilling the wishes of both, insofar as they are mutually compatible.